Emperor Belos from the Owl House is a tragic villain, and it does not make somebody a bad person to like his character. Let me explain. In case it wasn't obvious, this video will contain spoilers for the Owl House. If you haven't seen the show and would like to in the future, or haven't finished it yet and would like to steer clear of spoilers concerning the ending, please click away now. Otherwise, let's get started. Belos' story is conveniently shoved into the background with little to no emphasis on it, presented on screen just long enough for those paying attention to point it out and piece it together, but with enough red tape and shadows obscuring it for it to go unnoticed by a casual viewer. In fact, before Season 3 Episode 1 of The Owl House, thanks to them, many fans were unaware of Belos' backstory, despite having an entire episode dedicated to exploring Belos' mind. In case you need a refresher, here is what we know about Belos' backstory based on the limited information we were given. Belos grew up in a small colonial village in what would later be named Bravesfield. It's explained that Belos, who I will be referring to as Philip until further notice, was raised by his older brother Caleb. Being orphans and newcomers to this village, they were outcasted by the townsfolk. To fit in, Caleb actively participated in the town's witch hunts and encouraged Philip to do the same. While it's not outright stated, it's implied that Caleb didn't fully subscribe to the ideology that the townsfolk of Bravesfield did. That he didn't actually hate and fear witchcraft, but because he wanted a good life for his little brother, he decided to play the role. It's also implied that Philip, being a little kid following the lead of the people he looked up to, did fully subscribe to the ideology of the witch hunters, because that was all he was raised to believe. This is where the timeline starts to get a little mucky, but using bits of information, either pulled straight from Dana Terrace, the creator of the Owl House, or pulled straight from the actual show itself, we've managed to form what we think is a very cohesive story to follow. By the time that Caleb was a teenager, he would have met a young witch named Evelyn. She waited to tell him that she was a witch until she was sure that he could be trusted with that secret. But after Evelyn did reveal to him that she was a witch, it's implied that Caleb left the human realm for the demon realm pretty immediately. If we look at both Masha's exposition drop in Thanks to Them and Philip's memories in Hollow Mind, we see that Philip would have still been a child by the time Caleb left, likely being around how old Luce was in the first episode of the show. After Caleb left, Philip searched tirelessly for his brother, leaving home for the demon realm and spending his teenage and adult years in the Boiling Isles. We know this because when Philip sets off to find Caleb, he's dressed in his childhood clothes, and in the portrait where we see Philip reuniting with Caleb, he's a grown man with a full-length beard. Philip had spent all those years believing that his brother had been stolen away from him. Philip believed that Caleb had been bewitched and dragged away from his home by this evil, faceless demon, and he could not believe that Caleb would willingly abandon him. So when Philip does find Caleb and he discovers that he had gotten married to Evelyn and had a baby on the way, Philip couldn't believe it. It's unclear how the fight played out, but by the end of it, Caleb is killed and Philip flees the scene after being shot, presumably being cursed by Evelyn. The rest of the story plays out about how one would expect. Philip carves glyphs into himself to be able to control the magic of the palisman he consumes. He goes from town to town looking for demons to use in his quest to build a portal and find the collector, and eventually he slices his ears to look more witch-like and changes his name to Belos so he couldn't be recognized and brought to justice for his crimes. He traveled as a prophet to indoctrinate witches and demons into his coven system, became emperor, and you all know the rest. So, to recap, Philip was a young child, raised in a religious cult with only his brother and other witch hunters to guide him through life. His brother, the only family he has, disappears after meeting a witch, leading Philip to believe that he must have been kidnapped or bewitched, so he chases after him in hopes of bringing him back home. When Philip finds his brother again years later, he believes that his brother has been brainwashed by the witch who stole him. He accidentally kills his brother while trying to murder the witch, and then spends the rest of his life trying to purge all life from the Boiling Isles because he believes that doing that will somehow make things right again. Belos is an evil man, and every crime he committed throughout his life was despicable. There is no room for redemption for Belos in the canon of the show. So, why do I bother making this video? I was inspired to make this video after it came to my attention that people who enjoy Belos as a character get an unprecedented amount of harassment simply on the basis of liking his character. Some people going as far as sending messages and DMs telling people to kill themselves, and going on entire rants just to call Belos fans bigots and racists for daring to find a morally bad character interesting. One accusation I've seen is that Belos Antis, the name given to people who hate Belos and harass the people who enjoy his character, believe that Belos enjoyers and Belos simps believe that Belos isn't actually a bad guy, and that we somehow excuse his behavior under the guise of Belos is just a traumatized boy who deserves happiness, when the actual truth is that the majority of Belos fans accept that in the canon of the show, Belos is irredeemable. He cannot change, and even if he did change, he has done far too much to deserve any punishment other than death. Another common thing that I see thrown around is that Belos is based off of someone who traumatized Dana Terrace, so it is insensitive for people to like him. But I would argue that Belos being based off of a toxic real-life person is perfect grounds for people to cling to him as a comfort character. Full stop. If Belos is meant to be based off of a real person in Dana's life, then it makes sense for people to also relate Belos to a person in their own life. It's not uncommon for people to have a family member or friend fall down the alt-right pipeline. Someone they knew from their childhood suddenly turns out to be a bigoted racist who believes the most horrific things they've ever heard, and supports and votes for people who want them and people like them dead. It stings to find out that someone who you care about very deeply believes horrible things. It can drive a wedge between you and that person, and sometimes their minds cannot be changed, so you have to cut them out of your life before you get poisoned by them. Belos can be someone's father, someone's mother, grandparent, sibling, best friend, etc. Belos can be anyone, because anyone can be radicalized and made to believe heinous things. Because Belos can represent anyone in a person's life, many fans have clung to him as a comfort character, going as far as to write AUs where Belos gets a redemption arc, AUs where Belos is a bad man but a good parental figure, and AUs where Philip's story changes before he ever has the chance to become Belos. People like making up stories where the person who hurt them, the person they love who they had to cut out of their life, learns how to be better and grows out of the bigoted headspace they're in, and there's nothing wrong with doing that. Shows in the past, like Steven Universe or She-Ra, have redeemed villains that were on the same level, if not a higher level, than Belos is. And while the shows themselves received pushback for doing this, it didn't feel like the fans of those shows who liked those villains got as much pushback for liking those evil genocidal dictators as Belos fans do for liking this one specific evil genocidal dictator. And a little tangent before I move on, if we're really going to judge people based off of whose fictional crush is worse, if we run the numbers, then it looks like Belos is the one with the least amount of atrocities under his belt. So why is it that Belos enjoyers get so much undeserved harassment? Because we've already gone over the fact that they don't agree morally with Belos, and they don't excuse his actions, which is more than what I can say for the Diamonds, or dare I say Hordak or Shadow Weaver. So what is the reason for this unprecedented amount of hate? I think that the amount of hate and harassment that Belos enjoyers get can be attributed to how the show handled Belos' character as a whole. The Owl House fumbled Belos' story in a way that feels horribly anticlimactic, to the point that it can even feel rage-inducing when you realize what we could have had. And while part of this can be pinned on Disney for canceling the Owl House and cutting the show short, a good chunk of the blame actually falls on Dana's shoulders and the writing team behind the Owl House. I say this because while Disney can be blamed for the cut episodes where we got to see more of Philip's backstory motivation, the writing team for the Owl House is to blame for scraping dialogue for existing episodes that would have added more to Belos' character without taking away from the fact that he is still an evil man who needs to be defeated. The show takes its time in the first season to tell the viewer that this is not going to be like most other fantasy shows, that this isn't going to fall into the chosen one trope, and that this world isn't all black and white. Both Philip and Luce came to the Boiling Isles believing that they were the hero of their stories. Both acted selfishly and hurt those around them, and the only difference that sets Luce apart from Philip is that while Luce learned from her experience, changed her perspective, and grew up, Philip only sunk deeper and deeper into the fantasy he had crafted around himself, refusing to let go of this idea that he was somehow the hero despite everything that he had done. With the parallels that were being drawn to Luce and Philip, it might have even resulted in a scene where Luce realized that her and Philip were more similar than she initially thought. She could have had a moment of realization where she realized that if the chips had fallen just a little bit differently, maybe Philip wouldn't have had to be this evil guy that she had to take down. Maybe he could have actually been someone she could look up to, like how she did before the events of Elsewhere and Elsewhen. And then, after having that realization, she could have come to the decision that it didn't matter how things could have been, because as things were now, Philip was an evil man who needed to be taken down. That would have been way more nuanced, and it would have fit the idea of you forge your own path better than what we got. But then, by the finale, they uproot everything they had been building for Philip. His childhood and backstory were never even mentioned by any of the characters, despite half of the Hex Squad having been inside of Belos' mind and memories. And, to add insult to injury, not only do they never mention it, but they do everything in their power to retcon it. All of that garbage about not waiting for fate to choose you because you're not special unless you make yourself special? Fuck that. Let's just casually let loose meet fucking God, and then have God tell her that actually she is special, and all good, and the hero of her own story. And the guy the crew had been drawing parallels to Luce this whole time, he's actually just straight up evil. Always has been. There's no backstory that could be addressed to explain how Belos is literally just a regular dude that under the right circumstances became the monster he is. No commentary about normal everyday people having the capacity to be monsters. No, evil isn't made, it's born, because why the hell would you ever want your viewers to think anything nuanced? The cut dialogue, on top of how Belos' character was treated in the finale of Owl House, paints a very clear picture that Belos was never going to be given any depth other than a breadcrumb trail and a wink at the camera. And that is frustrating, because it means that it leaves people who actually enjoy Belos' story dissatisfied, and on top of that, it gives the loud, toxic side of the Owl House fandom an excuse to harass and bully the people who actually are invested in Wittebane lore and want closure for that part of the story. Because if the creators of the show didn't respect this character enough to give him a proper ending to his storyline, how could we expect the Owl House community to show an inkling of respect for that character's fans?